What's up, guys? Today we're talking about the Arkansas Razorbacks, a team that can go one of two ways this year. On one side, they got great talent, of course. We know what they did at the beginning of the season last year, really making a name for themselves. And on the other side, they have a really tough schedule, playing in the SEC West. So we're going to get into it straight away. Drew, kick us off. Go ahead. Of course, we know Sam Pittman and the culture he's been able to install so quickly has been really impressive. So go ahead and give us your first thoughts on, what him and what he's been able to do so far.
Yeah, Sam Pittman at Georgia, I mean, he's always been known as a player's coach. Players love to play for him, and I think that's very important, obviously, when you're coaching a team. He's a dude that likes to get the best out of his players. He always tries to get a lot of people on the field, regardless of talent level, and that's how you really win teams, I feel like, especially at this level. Because when you're coaching a SEC team, you're going to have a lot of talent on the roster, and when you try to play a side where you try to get a lot of those players on the field, you really can just get the team to really, enjoy playing for you. And I think that's just super important. And he's just a good offensive mind. I mean, he's an offensive line coach. And you've mentioned it in multiple videos that offensive line coaches that transition to a head coaching job usually just have a better time of just taking the role over and really installing something that the players can get behind. And Arkansas as a team, I mean, last year, they really did look night and day difference, and we've known this past couple of years now since he's taken over. They just look night and day different than what they looked like 3 or 4 years ago. A team 3 or 4 years ago that was losing to teams like North Texas, not even losing, but getting blown out. And just the culture there now, Arkansas is winning a lot of games they're supposed to be winning. Even when they face some adversity, which we saw last year, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Usually the old Arkansas teams would shut down, but in most cases they would try to fight their way back in the game. And that right there, I mean, that just pretty much tells you the story of the tale of what he's done there. And Arkansas, it was a really fun team to watch last year. I mean, I'm sure you watched the offense. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you thought about Arkansas's offense last year, because they were explosive at times, but they also had their flaws as well.
Of course, we can't talk about Arkansas's offense without talking about the run game. They had the best run game in the Power 5 last year, and they're definitely going to bounce back this year and have arguably an even better and more dominant run game with the stable of running backs that they have. And, of course, they're returning 4 or 5 linemen, so they're going to pick up right where they left off as far as the run game. The number one concern as far as their offense goes is definitely going to be the receivers this year. They're losing their best receiver that they had last year. They're getting Jadon Haselwood, a legendary high school player in the state of Georgia. Of course, you know that legendary play he had in the state championship a couple years ago. He was at Oklahoma, but he's one of those guys, in my opinion, and maybe you can comment on this. You played receiver yourself, so there's those guys that if they're just getting 4 or 5 touches a game, they're not going to have the same impact at all as if they have 10, 12. Some guys need 10, 12 touches a game. Like, they need to be that number one receiver, and they get into the flow of the game as they get more touches and get more warm and more into the game. So I think he's one of those guys that has to be a number one receiver, and I think that Arkansas is going to use him that way. So what do you think, from being a receiver, how is him coming into Arkansas where there's not a dominant receiver in the room right now? What do you think the impact he's going to have coming in is going to be like?
Yeah, as a receiver, from what I could say from past experiences, it's very hard sometimes when you're not getting the ball a lot in the game. One, it almost kind of it hurts your confidence a little bit because, for one, you're not getting the ball a lot, so when you do get the ball, you're not exactly comfortable on the field. And you've played receiver too. You know how it feels when you're in a game. You're a little bit nervous at first, but once you get that first catch or second catch, your confidence just goes through the roof and you start playing a lot better. And a guy as talented as Haselwood, I mean, he is one of those guys that could for sure be a number one receiver. And there's no question about that. Obviously, Oklahoma is always loaded with offensive talent. So, when you take these guys that have been the number one receiver most of their life and you put them in a situation like this, and this almost goes for any position, but receiver especially, when you're not getting those touches in the game, it really kind of, I don't really want to say it hurts your performance, but it definitely makes you, I guess, think a little bit, because when you're not getting the ball as much, there's a little bit more pressure on you because you understand, okay, I'm not getting the ball a lot, but when they do throw it to me, I better catch it or I'm not going to be playing. And that's probably the best way I can explain it. And I don't think he was really a big fan of that. And obviously Treylon Burkes, he's gone to the Tennessee Titans for Arkansas. He was one of their best receivers last year. And I think he just saw that as an opportunity to definitely go in. And as an experienced college receiver who's been in the scene for a little bit, I think he definitely just needed a change, and I think he's back in SEC football where I think he belongs, to be honest. I mean, if you grew up playing in the Southeast, you're going to want to stay in the Southeast for college football, and plus it's going to make you a better receiver and help, transition to the NFL, which, they just put a receiver in the NFL, so he saw that as another opportunity. Like, if he performs well, he can go to the NFL. But you were mentioning you watched the spring game and you saw a point of concern for Arkansas's offense was the wide receivers. Obviously, you said they had a lot of drops and a lot of inconsistencies, but one thing to note too is their offensive line. Last year, when Arkansas's offense was rolling and they were explosive, they had their offensive line playing great. They just had their games where they would play really well or not well at all, and it seemed like whenever that offense stalled, it came from the offensive line. Now, when KJ Jefferson has time in the pocket, he can deliver some great throws. He's a smart quarterback. He has a cannon for an arm. When you watched him in the spring game, when he had protection, how did he look? Do you think we're going to get the same KJ Jefferson as last year? Do you think he's improved any? Just give me your thoughts a little bit on how he looked.
Yeah, man, let me tell you this, dude. I was really impressed with how he looked, man. Like, not even trying to exaggerate or anything. The first thing I thought of when I saw him was like, that looks like a Cam Newton type quarterback right there.
Mm-hmm.
Just with his size, his frame, you know what I'm saying? How he looks in the pocket. He just looks like a big, strong Cam Newton like quarterback. One thing that I took away from watching him play, like I said, his receivers were dropping the ball, but his release, getting it out in the short and intermediate passing game looked really improved from last season. He looked comfortable in the three-step or, just getting the ball straight off the snap and getting it out of his hands immediately. Looked a lot more comfortable than he did during games last season. Listening to what he said in one of the interviews during the pregame, he said last year there wasn't much pressure on him, to perform or anything like that. This year he's a known and established guy in the locker room and on the team, so he's got to take on that leadership role, and I really think that he's embraced that. And, I talk about it all the time, especially with the position like quarterback. It's 80 to 85% mental, man. And he's taking on that burden of being the leader, and he's embracing being the guy. And, dude, I think that he's, he can be on the trajectory to have an amazing season for the Razorbacks this year, with the help of his receivers, of course. But as far as the offensive line goes, you hit the nail on the head. You didn't mention. I don't know how. I don't remember how much in detail you got. They're a dominant run blocking O line, but they did have some weaknesses in the pass blocking game, and that comes down a lot to communication. And sometimes guys can be tired after doing 6-7 run plays in a row. Pulling, getting to the second level, gashing them for 20. Then having to set back and pass block and having the D-line run a stun on you. You know what I'm saying? You can use that pass block as an opportunity to take a play off, and in the SEC you can't do that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
If they can improve just a little bit, just enough to give KJ Jefferson some time to get it to his receivers, I think that this offense can really take that next step because, we all know that they're a dominant dominant running team. And for them to take the next step in the SEC West, they're going to have to turn into a formidable passing team as well. And, given the O-line improves and given Jadon Haselwood can make an impact on this team, I think that they can do that. But that was their offense right there, guys. That's pretty much it for them. Getting into the defense, one of the biggest points of emphasis on this Arkansas team this year is their transfers. That culture that Sam Pittman's been able to install has inspired countless transfers to come in, and they're going to be able to make an impact right away, especially on this defense. I just want to ring off a couple of names here. We're going to get into these guys in more detail later. Brini from UGA, Drew Sanders from Alabama, Landon Jackson from LSU, and Jordan Dominic from Georgia Tech. These are all SEC transfers that are going to come onto this defense and have an immediate impact. Drew, what do you think it's going to be like for this Arkansas defense to get these big-time players? I mean, Drew Sanders was a 5-star at Alabama. Or before he got to Alabama. What do you think the impact these guys are going to have on the defense is going to be like?
I mean, just getting those guys, like you mentioned, Drew Sanders, this is a guy who had a lot of playing time for the Alabama Crimson Tide. If you can pull in players of that caliber coming from schools like that have experience, I mean, your defense is only going to get better. I don't see a scenario in which it gets worse. And just talking about Arkansas's defense, I mean, everyone knows what their defense was last year. That defense was the reason Arkansas lost, some of the games they lost. I mean, let's just be real here. Their pass rush wasn't very good. They gave up like 400 yards in 4 different games, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, this is SEC standards we're talking about, and you just can't be giving up 400 yards a game in the SEC. You're going to be playing teams that are way too talented, that have really talented defenses where your offense is probably not going to be good enough to make up you giving up 400 yards. I mean, you just watch a lot of the games last year. It's as great as Arkansas's offense was, they're just not going to be able to keep up. But if Arkansas really wants to get to where they want to get, they're going to have to win games by winning defensive drives. Aiden, you watched the defense a lot last year too. You know a lot about them and a lot about the performances last year. What games in particular to you stood out last year where Arkansas's defense, they just can't have a repeat of this season if they want to be successful?
I'd have to say the biggest game was definitely the Ole Miss game, where the offense just, was putting up those points, but it wasn't enough to get them to dig themselves out of the hole that the defense dug them in. And just what you said, you're going to have to win defensive drives. And the addition of Jalen Catalon is just going to help that, tremendously. He got hurt at the beginning of the season last year, but this is one of the best safeties in all of college football. He is a playmaker. With him on the field, it's going to be an absolute difference. And then also, like we were just talking about, Latavius Brini from UGA coming to play DB for him too, so he's going to have an impact. And as far as the defensive backfield goes, you mentioned it, defensively, their biggest liability was without a doubt their defensive line. Pressure was the reason that their defense was so bad. You can't be asking defensive backs to guard SEC caliber or any receiver for over 4 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. You can't run with the guy for over 4 seconds. So the D-line's got to get pressure. They got to stuff the run. Your linebackers, like last year, Arkansas's linebackers carried that whole defense. And you're losing a couple guys. Of course, you're bringing in Drew Sanders, who's going to be an absolute beast. And then you already have Bumper Poole, who's the second leading tackler returning in the SEC. So the linebacker core is going to be super, super strong. That's definitely going to be where the strength of this defense lies. But it's going to be on the D-line to help them out, because speaking from experience, I played with all due respect, I played with terrible D-lines and I played with all-American caliber D-lines, and when those D-linemen are getting pushed back into your face right when the ball snapped, you have no room to move, you got no room to read, and it's 10 times harder to make plays. You need these D-linemen taking up offensive bodies, taking up gaps, holding up double teams, not allowing the offensive line to get to that second level so that you're able to roam free laterally and make these plays as a linebacker. So it all kind of trickles down to this D-line, and with the transfers, Landon Jackson, the edge player coming from LSU, hopefully he's going to be able to come in and have a big impact. And one guy from the spring game, John Hill, he impressed me. So these are just guys that are going to have to step up, because without a good D-line, this defense is going to be in real trouble.
So if we talk about offense, talk about the defense. And I think you mentioned at the beginning of the video, Arkansas' schedule. They don't exactly have the easiest schedule. I mean, I got it pulled up right here. One thing to note is they do have 4 true away games, and compared to the average team having about 6 true away games. They have 5 away games if you count the Texas A&M game. They play that at a neutral site field in Dallas. You just look at these games: Cincinnati, Texas A&M, Alabama, BYU, Ole Miss. I mean, these are a lot of top 25 teams this year. I think you would have to agree, Aiden, that Arkansas could drop a couple of these games, but there's still plenty of room for some big-time wins here that Arkansas might finish in the top 10.
100%. I mean, if these guys have an 8 or 9 win season, I mean, that's a great season for these guys just based off the strength of schedule alone. We're going to figure out what this team is early. Like Cincinnati in the season opener, they're losing a lot of key talent, but they're still a team. They play Alabama early. They play BYU early. They play South Carolina week 2. Is that correct? So, South Carolina is going to be a new team. So we're going to figure out what this team is early. It's going to be exciting to see. But 8 or 9 wins is going to be a success for these guys just because of their strength of schedule is so hard.
Yeah, Arkansas, I mean, they're just set up to have a good season if they take advantage of the advantages that they have. Like I said, they have a lot of home games this year. You play Cincinnati, South Carolina. You start off with 2 big games right there at home. That's a big, big difference right there as compared to playing them on the road. Cincinnati, that's a far travel. Going there would be a tough environment to play in, and that's just traveling. You don't want to travel that far for a week 1 game, in my personal opinion. You then open up conference play at home as well against South Carolina. That's a big plus. You get Missouri State. That's a win. Texas A&M, it's not a home game, but it's not an away game either. You're not going to Kyle Field in front of 100,000 Texas A&M fans, and you get Texas A&M in a good spot. Texas A&M has a tough stretch of games. They start with Miami, and then they play Arkansas, and then Mississippi State, and then Alabama. I think you catch Texas A&M in a really good spot, and that puts you in a position to maybe get the win over them again this year, like you did last year. Alabama, you get them at home. Arkansas put up a great fight against Alabama last year, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about old Arkansas teams would get down by 2 scores and would just throw in the towel. That wasn't the case under a Sam Pittman team last year. I mean, that game came down to an onside kick. If Arkansas got that onside kick, there's no telling what they could have done with it. They could have very easily tied that game up. I mean, you just never know. The brutal part of the schedule is going to be on the road. You're on the road for 3 straight games. You got Mississippi State, BYU, and Auburn. BYU is a weird game. This is definitely teams that don't play each other very often at all. I'm kind of glad that college football is starting to schedule these games, or teams are starting to schedule these weird games where you just don't really expect them to play with one another. You don't expect these teams to play. That's the best way I could put it. Then you get Liberty and LSU at home, Ole Miss at home. And then you finish with the road game at Missouri. So out of all those games I just mentioned, what games do you think are must-win games for this team?
You got to beat A&M, you got to beat Ole Miss, and you got to beat Auburn. I mean, if you want to take the next step, you got to beat those teams. You know what I'm saying? And BYU is one of those teams too, but they're at the bottom of that list, so I didn't think I'd have to mention them. But A&M and Ole Miss, you let the Ole Miss game get away from you that last year. That I don't think Sam Pittman is going to let that happen this year. I just love this Arkansas team because this is a team that travels. The style of play that they use travels to away games. You know what I'm saying? They're physical, hard-nosed, run the ball down your throat football team. And, that travels. So it's going to be super interesting to see what they can do this year. If they can take the next step with the D-line and, if the receivers can step up, this team can take a big step this year.
And then obviously the Cincinnati game, the BYU game. I mean, those realistically, if Arkansas wins the games they're supposed to win this year, they could be looking at best a 10-win season. And if they hit 10 wins with this schedule, they're going to be finishing as a top 10 team and potentially.
That's a New Year's Six Bowl.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Potentially a bid for a New Year's Six Bowl. So I think Arkansas fans have a lot to be excited for this year. A lot of it's going to depend on that Cincinnati game, though. You absolutely have to win that game. I think that game right there is going to either help Arkansas or completely derail them. But then again, with the Sam Pittman coach team, there's no telling how they're going to rebound for that if they were to lose the game.
But that's basically it, guys. Our thoughts on the Arkansas Razorbacks this year. They're a team that's returning a lot of talent, like Drew said, but they do have a very tough schedule like we just got into. So it's going to be super fun to see how these guys perform this year and how Sam Pittman takes his men into battle and how they do. But that's going to conclude this video, guys. Leave a like, subscribe, and comment if you're down, if you got it this far, and let us know your thoughts below. We really appreciate all the recent support. We're going to be pumping these videos out. Let us know what else you want to see, but that's it. We'll see y'all.